Hey everybody, Mike Phillips. This is our Wednesday detailing classes that are live online. We do these every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Pacific Time. And usually Yancy is here. He does this 3 weeks out of the month. So 1 week out of the month, I got to kind of wing it on my own with my comrade back there in Chicago, Victor, and also my cameraman today, Craig. So we're going to just run with that kind of program. Today's topic is going to be all about orange peel. Now, orange peel is, first let's talk about what it is and then how to remove it and why to remove it. But I always like to kind of start off by saying that 99.9% of the population should not be trying to remove orange peel because most of you are working on a factory finish. And I always like to keep some post-it notes around because this is something people can wrap their brain around. So over up to the left here, I have a 1948 Ford pickup. This has a custom paint job. You can go ahead and pan. This is a custom paint job. It's here this weekend for my big 3-day class. And on Saturday, we cover machine dry sanding. So this is a custom paint job. The painter put extra paint on it because he knows it's gonna be sanded. So this truck is safe to actually hand or machine, dry or wet sand, and then cut and buff. And of course, we'll end up with ceramic coating. But if you take a Post-it note, or just the average piece of printer paper, or even a dollar bill, and hold it between your thumb and your index finger, your brain can understand and wrap around how thin that is. And the average Post-it note is around 3 mils, okay? I know my friends across the pond use microns. I can understand 3 mils because I understand a Post-it note is 3 mils. And here's the deal, your factory clear coat is around 2 mils or thinner. And what that means, when you hold that Post-it note between your thumb and your index finger, and you go, wow, that's really thin. Okay, well, let it sink in. Your clear coat's even thinner. So that's why I say most people should not be sanding on factory finishes. Most of the sanding that's done in the world is done on collision repair. So you have a 2014 Honda Accord, you wreck it, they put a new fender on it, they repaint the fender to match the adjacent panels. That has custom paint. A lot of times the body shop may sand it lightly to match the new orange peel, the orange peel that's on the fresh paint, to the factory peel, and to kind of schmoo it over and make it look good. Most of the other type of sanding is done on something like the 48 over there. So you got to think about it. Usually it's cars that are restored or hot rodded. So typically it'd be someone that, say they went to high school, and in high school back in the 60s or the 70s, they had a 69 Chevelle. They get along in life, they're doing pretty good, and at some point they want to rebuild that car that they loved in high school. So they buy a 69 Chevelle, they rebuild the motor, they rebuild the brakes, they run the new brake lines, the new suspension, and at some point that 69 Chevelle is going to be taken to a body shop, a custom shop, and it's going to go into the paint booth and it's going to get a custom paint job. So then they're going to paint the whole thing, and again, the painter knows it's going to get sanded and buffed, so he puts extra clear coat on it. So when it comes out, it's got plenty of paint to sand, cut, and buff. And I always like to let people know that whenever you're doing this type of work, sanding takes off some paint, compounding takes off some paint, polishing takes off a little paint, and that's why you need some paint to work with. You shouldn't be sanding factory finishes. So I kind of wanted to nail that one in the very first place. Now, the next thing I want to talk about as far as orange peel is, what is orange peel? Well, simply put, it's the texture, the surface texture of paint after it's sprayed and dried, and it has the appearance of the peel on an orange. And so it's basically divots, it's high points and divots in a circular pattern on an orange, but on a car it's over the entire plane of the entire surface. And using my whiteboard back here, another way to explain orange peel is it's kind of like hills and valleys. Okay, so the paint, you're looking at this from a horizontal point of view, and you have high points and low points, and then when you look into the paint job, it doesn't reflect your image clearly because it's all marbled or warbled. You know, it's mottled. And a lot of people, they buy a brand new car, especially guys that buy like Corvettes, and one of the biggest complaints is, wow, I really love the car, but look at all the orange peel. And of course, sometimes these guys say, hey, well, if we can sand it, and they meet a guy like me that pulls out a Post-it note and says, no, the factory clear on your Corvette is thinner than a Post-it note. And even the best detailers in the world, if they sand it, buff it, and polish it, the chances of going through the clear are really great. And even if they don't, keep this in mind. Even if someone sands down a factory finish, compounds it and polishes it and ceramic coats it, they've left that clear coat so thin that exposed to the outdoor weather, both rain and sun, that clear coat's going to give up prematurely. You're going to get clear coat failure. So again, another reason you really shouldn't be sanding factory paint. So that's what orange peel. It's an imperfect surface, and it doesn't create crisp reflections when you look into it or you see something reflect out of it. Now, there's a term in the industry called DOI. So that's what orange peel is. Now let's talk about why would you want to sand orange peel? Well, the reason people would sand their paint job on their car to remove the orange peel is to take this hills and valley surface texture and flatten it out, get it completely flat. And the flatter you get it, the you maximize what's called DOI. So let me just write that down. So DOI, that stands for distinction of image. So a mirror, if you get up in the morning and shave, or ladies, you're putting your makeup on, you're looking into a mirror is 100% DOI. It reflects your image back at you perfectly. And the idea behind why you would sand a car down that has orange peel is because via the sanding process, whether it's by hand, by machine, whether it's wet or it's dry, you're gonna start taking all the paint off on the high points until you lower the highest portion of the paint to the lowest portion of the paint, and you end up with a very flat surface. So then the paint is very flat, and look more like, from a horizontal point of view, completely flat. Then when you compound it, pull your sanding marks out and polish it, restore clarity and gloss. Now when you look into it, it's like a mirror. So you've heard of the term a mirror finish, a show car finish. And that's why we sand paint. So orange peel is an irregular surface texture that after the paint has been sprayed and dried, it doesn't dry completely flat. The reason we sand is to flatten it out to get that mirror image, because back to the guy that restored a 69 Chevelle or any car that someone fixes up, usually the purpose is to make it look good. We want it to look good. We got new chrome trim, new chrome bumpers, new glass, new engine, and the paint has been sanded and buffed, and now it has a show car shine or a mirror finish. So anyway, so that's kind of what orange peel is, and how you remove it, and who should remove it and who shouldn't remove it. You know, it should always be on something with not a factory finish, but a custom paint job like the 48 Ford sitting over there. And let's see, doing a brain dump here. Then when we talk about sanding orange peel, there's a number of different ways to do it. So for years, when I worked at McGuire's, I always taught hand wet sanding. And there's a purpose for hand wet sanding. In fact, the best looking finishes are always what they call hard blocked. And so first of all, you got a painter that puts plenty of paint on. Then you take these acrylic hard blocks, wrap your 600 or 800 grit stamp paper around it, and has a little bit of soapy water, and you just start sanding that paint. And what you're looking to see is when you've leveled the orange peel so the whole thing's flat. After you get it flat, then you start refining your sanding marks to a higher and higher level, so the buffing is a lot easier. It also improves the appearance of the finish, just all these extra steps. So wet sanding is an option. One thing about wet sanding is it is messy. You have what's called a slurry. So a slurry is the water and the paint that you're abrading off mixes together. In the old days, before clear coats, when we had single stage paint, they called this color sanding, and the water would, if you're sanding a red car, the slurry would turn red. And nowadays, it's just kind of called wet sanding. And then when you sand something clear, if you scratch glass or you sand a clear coat, it turns opaque or white. So if you're sanding a clear coat, you look at your slurry, it looks like milk water, like watery milk water. And that whiteness is the clear paint that was clear, but now you've abraded it, so it gave it a opaque or white color to it. And then the thing about wet sanding is you have water that seeps into all the cracks and crevices, so it's kind of messy. And then you can machine sand wet. So there are sanding discs out there like the 3M Trizac and the Eagle abrasives. And these are designed, the Trizac and the Eagle abrasives can be used wet or dry. Some of the benefits to machine sanding wet is your sanding discs won't load up, because a little bit of soapy water just keeps the paint particles you're removing off the body panel from actually sticking to the sanding disc, so you get some more life out of it. Also, it lubricates the surface, so sometimes you get a cleaner cut. I'm sure there's some other reasons that I can't think of, but that's wet sanding by hand, wet sanding by machine. Now, wet sanding dry, wet sanding dry car paint, I've actually never done that, because the problem with that is your sanding paper will load up with paint very quickly, and you won't get a lot of life out of the paint. And also, when you have a big chunk of paint that's stuck to the face of the sanding paper and you push it over the paint, you're marring the paint as you're sanding it. So it's just not a really good way. If you're going to do any hand sanding, it should usually be done wet, unless it's just a spot repair. I mean, I'm always talking in the context of sanding down an entire vehicle. And then the other option is machine dry sanding. And so while in a former life I taught a lot of machine or wet hand sanding, nowadays I teach dry sanding. I show things like the Kovacs. This is actually called Eagle Abrasives by Kovacs. That is the brand. A lot of people call it Kovacs, but if you go up to their website and you look at their logo, it says Eagle Abrasives by Kovacs. That's the entire name for the brand. But whether you call it Eagle Abrasives or call it Kovacs or the entire name, they make the best sanding discs and sanding papers on the market, in my opinion, today. And they have a very well thought out system of interface pads and sanding blocks to go with it. It's something you can check out on your own time. But the thing I like about machine dry sanding is you don't have water slurry running all over the inside of the cracks and crevices, inside the frame rails of the car. You also don't have it on the floor. And it's faster to check your progress. So in your machine dry sanding, you can run your sand over the paint, stop, wipe it with a dry towel, and you can visually see where you sanded it flat and where you still have orange peel, so you can move on from that space, that spot, to a new area. And then, of course, once in a while, just hold a terry cloth or microfiber towel to the face of the disc and just kind of lift the throttle on the sander, and it'll pull all that sanding dust off. The downside of dry sanding is you should always wear a respirator, some personal protection equipment of some form. Now, in the last year, I've sanded down a 1969 dry sanded, machine dry sanded, a 1969 GTO. That was a Miranda built car. I did a Grasso Garage 1969 Charger black and a 55 Chevy Bel Air. All of them I machine dry sanded, and all of them I sanded in about an hour. So once you get comfortable with how the system works, it is actually a fairly fast system too, and again, no mess. And the reason I wanted to point that out is not to say how fast I can sand down the car, but I'm okay with dealing with wearing a dust mask or a respirator for about an hour. If it was like all day long, I might start looking at other options, like go back to machine wet sanding or machine hand sanding, because I don't want to wear a respirator. But if I can knock something out that quickly, then I don't mind wearing a respirator for that short amount of time. Anyway, so those are the different options. And one of the things I just wanted to point out is at the classes that we teach here at the operating room, the OR in sunny Stuart, Florida, at the Dr. Beasley's training center here, is I always try, and usually I'm successful at bringing in what I call the real deal. So if you want to pan over here, this is my demo hood that I had taken a SEMA for about 20 years. I think it's off an old Fox Body Ford or a Capri. It's like a perfect rectangle. But in most classes, when you're sanding, what you'll do is you will be assigned a section of the panel, usually something about this big, where you'll sand it, cut it, and buff it. And that is a great way to learn, how to move your hand, or how do you move the machine, how to use a rotary polisher to pull out your sanding marks. It's a great way. But what I find is, you want to pan back over here to the 50 to the 48. What I bring in is the kind of cars that actually really get sanded. So something that somebody spent some time, they've rebuilt it. This is actually sitting on a Chevy S10 frame with a Chevy S10 motor. It's actually got a Chevy S10 dash in it. And someone's taken the time to go ahead and sand it down, do the body work, and put a custom paint job on it. So now when you come to my class, instead of working on a flat little panel about waist high, doing a section about the size of a microfiber towel, you're going to be responsible with a team of people to sand down the entire car and then buff it out and get out 100% of your sanding marks. And when you're sanding down a vehicle, now it has what I call impact, okay? You're going to learn more, because now you've got to start looking out for all the raised body lines, all the edges, the glass, the rubber trim, the vinyl trim, antennas, door handles, grills, side mirrors. I mean, it's a lot more complicated, but you learn more. And I think one of the biggest things I've learned over the last 20 years of teaching sanding classes is that a lot of people want to learn how to do it, and it's a great skill set to have, especially for things like, say, someone has a car and a bird leaves a bird dropping, there's a little bit of modeling there, maybe you can lightly sand and pull it out. But what most people do is, after they learn exactly what it takes in a group situation to sand down an entire car, what they're going to do is they're going to go, I don't want to do this. And then I always point out, remember, back in your world, you're going to probably be by yourself. Right here, you've got a team of people all working together to tackle a car, or it's usually 2 cars. And so it's a lot to undertake. There is some risk to it. I always believe it's a great skill set to have. If nothing else, you can at least, if you know how to do it, you can at least talk intelligently about it in a group of your peers or online, because a lot of people start talking about it and actually, you can tell right away they've never done a whole car. There's a huge difference between doing a little spot and doing an entire car. So, but anyway, I just like to point that out. We bring in the real deal for these classes, and it's a lot of work. We dedicate a full day to it, start early, and we go till it's done. And my requirement is 100% standing mark removal. And usually the places that people struggle, because you remember a lot of times people taking the class, they're new to the rotary polisher, they're new to sanding. The places that they get on the sanding marks are the big, easy to buff area on the side of the door and the hood. The hard parts are anything by a raised body line, anything by an edge. So I always take my scroll finder line, go back, and I take a little bit of compound and I just mark every place there's sanding marks and say, hey, got to come back and get these things out. Anyway, that's kind of most of what I think I have about sanding and orange peel. I tell you one thing is, it is very rewarding if you're a professional detailer or just an enthusiast and you're asked to do a sand job on a car, or say you've restored a car and you want to sand it down and get that show car finish. I can remember back when I was in Oregon, I got asked to sand and buff. I think it was a 1972 Dino. I got one picture of it here somewhere. Single stage paint. I was the 3rd guy they hired to sand. It was the 3rd paint job, because the other 2 guys sanded and buffed it and went through to the primer or to the sheet metal or the underlying panels. And I think I knocked it out from start to finish in about 8 hours. So it was very rewarding. It's nice to see when I got there, you know, it had a lot of orange peel, DIP, dirt and paint. When I left, thing glistened. So can be very rewarding, a skill set to possess. Other than that, Victor, do you got any questions? Oh, I kind of wanted to point something out. Besides teaching machine dry sanding in our classes at Dr. Beasley's, we also teach bow detailing. This is a boat, I want to pan over, that we brought in for this weekend's class. This is an extremely neglected 26-foot Mako. Now, years ago, I wrote a book, and in the book, I included how to machine sand gel coat. So here's what I found in the industry. This would go back to about 2010. Most of the guys out there were taking a wool pad and an aggressive compound, and when they had a boat that was in really bad shape, they would compound the heck out of that boat. And that was the caveman technique, as I like to call it, because the problem with that is, and let me grab my rotary. You know what I can, I'll just grab this, because sometimes the demonstration helps. So if you've never buffed out a boat before, just looking at that one, first of all, one of the things you notice is the hole is a V shape. So it isn't straight up and down. So it's not like I'm buffing on an easy to buff vertical panel. I'm buffing on something that goes away from me. So now I got to run the polisher not like this, but like this, away from me. It taxes all your deltoid muscles, your back muscles, your shoulder muscles. But what guys, and even girls, would tend to do is you have an oxidized boat, so you start out, you're fresh, your muscles are in good shape, you're fresh, you're ready to go, you just had some coffee, you start buffing, and you do a pretty good job, okay? And as you progress down the side of the boat, you start to get tired, and all of a sudden, now it's not exciting. Buffing out a boat. Now it's like, I'm buffing out a boat. And so now you're not doing as good a work. But here's what happens when you throw somebody's compound on chalky, dry gel coat, just the act of buffing with it, it kind of, the oils and the solvents soak in, it darkens it so it can look like you removed the oxidation, and you have on the surface, but you haven't removed the deep oxidation. So the normal routine for the caveman technique is you wash the boat, you compound the boat, you polish the boat, you put a wax or ceramic coating on it. It looks good right there, but in about 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 or 6 months, it's back to looking oxidizing because you did not remove deep oxidation. So back in about 2012, I quit teaching buffing only, and I switched over to teaching machine sanding with the Mirka Abralon system, and I documented how to do it in probably one of the only exhaustive boat detailing books ever written, you know, on the market today. I don't know of another one. And but I show people how to go through and do it a more, they always say work harder instead of smarter. So a lot of people say that cliche, but they don't show you how to execute it. So what I do in my classes and what I wrote in this book was how to take the Mirka Abralon system, but you can also use the Eagle abrasive systems. Those can be used wet also. And machine sand the gel coat down. Depending on how bad it is, you might start with only 2,000, but maybe you go down to 1,000, maybe 800. I've never went past 1,000, but I'm just doing, I don't like to get too aggressive with other people's boats. But the thing about gel coat is it's thicker. She got more to work with. But machine sanded, and by the time you run it through a machine sanding process at 1,000, 2,000, maybe finish out at 3,000, you've removed all the deep oxidation. You have a beautifully flat finish, and then you start compounding, and you end up with a show car finish on a boat, and the results endure over time. So that's kind of the difference. It's more of the smarter approach on how to do it right the first time versus, there's always time to do it right the second time. Anyway, so that's one of the things we teach her in our boat classes is the complete process for taking a neglected boats, going from neglected to
All right, Mike. So we've got some questions in the comments here.
Okay.
Well, first of all, let's say hi to some of our friends. We've got Humberto, of course, first from Puerto Rico, ready to roll as always. Good to see you, Humberto. We got Kyle, recent future detailing graduate from last weekend. Good to see you, Kyle. Kirby's in here as well. Good to see you, Kirby, member of the Wienermobile detailing team there. Grant's here. Good to see you, Grant. And then we've got our first question here from a user named Corgi Owner. I bet those corgis are pretty cute. At what points are you taking most of the clear coat off when removing orange peel?
Good question, but if we go back to what I stated earlier, nobody should be sanding factory finishes, so you're not taking most of the clear coat off. What I do is I practice and I preach. Just like this, if I'm going to do sanding down some other guy's street rod that they got a lot of money into it, I ask them first thing, who painted the car? And a lot of times they know. Then I go, can I get their phone number? And I will call them and say, hey, Mike Phillips here. I'm getting ready to sand down the 69 Chevelle you just booked out, or the 48 Ford. How much paint did you spray? And most painters will say, well, we put on 2 heavy coats or 3 coats of clear. So you have some paint there to work with, sometimes maybe more. But, and coats aren't really a good indicator because me and Kevin Brown and Mike Pennington and Jason Rose, we buffed down a 1949 Ford Woody, and I called the painter and said, how many clear coat layers of paint did you put on? He says, I put down 2 coats. And I go, oh my gosh, that's not very much paint. He goes, oh, don't worry, they were heavy coats. So all sanding should be done realistically on custom paint, not factory paint. And then, as long as you're using great products and good technique, you shouldn't have a problem with taking too much clear off. But probably the best answer is when you're sanding, when you first start out, one of the variables that nobody has any control over is what's called top coat hardness. So soft paints will sand easy, hard paints will sand hard or take longer. So you have to get a feel for how hard that paint is, whether you're hand sanding or machine sanding. So when you start out, you just do a little spot, then you stop and inspect to see, have I got to where I want to be? Have I removed the peel to where I want it to be? And if so, move on to a new section. Don't keep sanding in that same place, and never keep a DA sander in one place for very long because it's removing paint. Good question, but it's one of those hypotheticals where you need to practice, you need to get good, and you need to work intelligently. And if you want to get practice, look, I tell people this all the time. You want to really become good at sanding paint, go get a job at a body shop. You'll start out sweeping the floor, removing bumpers, taking off bent panels, and at some point, someone will come along and say, okay, we're going to let you sand and buff this car, and one of the old timers there will show you how he does it, and then once they feel you're confident, they'll let you do all of it because it's really one of the least liked jobs in the body shop, and it's a way to do a lot of sanding and buffing so you can get really good at it. The other option is to go to the body shop and see if they got any panels they've removed that you can have. A lot of times they give them away to salvage collectors, people taking steel to salvage yards to sell it, or you can go to the salvage yard and pull a fender or pull a hood or a trunk lid off. The problem with I've done this a lot, I've probably pulled off as many hoods as anybody that's ever breathed. The problem when you go to the salvage yard is the reason the car's there is because it's wrecked. So either the front's been hit something, so now the hood's no good to use, or the back's been, or it's been squished on both ends. And so, it's really hard sometimes to find a good trunk lid or a good hood that actually hasn't been crumpled that you can sand on. And then the other option is, and this is one that I've been using for at least 15 years, is it's really bad. Go rent a car. So go rent a car, learn how to sand on it, take it back, and just be careful. Don't go through. Usually rental agents, you're looking for, used to be a dent size of your fist, now it's a dent size of a golf ball or a quarter. And if you don't do anything like that, they'll take it back, but just be careful. But that's a good way to learn.
Awesome. Okay, next we got a question from our good friend Rich Nealon, authorized detailer with Dr. Beasley's. Rich is wondering, what is the heaviest grit sandpaper you would use for removing heavy defects?
For heavy defects or removing orange peel, because there's a difference. You can sand
I guess both, yeah.
You swirled out, just because sometimes it can be safer to machine sand or to hand sand paint that's really screwed up, then come back with a rotary buffer and a heavy compound and push really hard because the defects are deep and create a lot of heat. That's one of the reasons McGuire's years ago introduced a product called Unigrit sanding discs. It was to try to help detailers remove deeper defects by working cool, because they were used with water versus pushing hard the wool pad. But for me, on most cars, I don't think I ever go past 1,000 grit. I know a lot of body shops, my local buddies here, they start at 600 and 800, but you gotta understand, they have a working relationship right next to the guy that painted it. Okay, so they know the guy put a lot of paint on. The guy that painted it knows that they're going to start with 600, so he's put more paint on it. And if something goes wrong, God forbid, hey, they're a body shop, they can put more paint on. So there's an old saying, it goes like this: use the least aggressive process to get the job done. And that's how you should always approach anything that's paint related on a car or gel coat on a boat. Use the least aggressive process. Now, I'll tell you this, the thing that all the people that say that leave out was the back half of it. So it goes like this: use the least aggressive process to get the job done, so you leave the most paint on the car. Okay, that's the part people leave out. Why would I use the least aggressive process? So I leave more paint on the car, so it'll last over the service life of the car and not have failure. Or so the gel coat will hold up over the surface life and not just reoxidize again, fail. So, but yeah, use the least aggressive process to get the job done. Yeah, and there's all kinds of different grades of sandpaper and sanding discs out there. I would always recommend using the best that you can find in the hand sanding market. Historically, the best sandpaper is called finishing paper, and it's the Nikken brand, Nikken. McGuire sells it. Grio sold it for a while. But it's an electronics grade finishing paper, not an automotive wet and dry sandpaper. And the primary difference is all the particles are unigrit in size, and the distribution of the sheet of paper is uniform placement. When you go to an automotive wet and dry, you have all different types of sizes of grit particles on the paper and random placement onto the paper. Well, the thing about the Nikken paper is it runs on a conveyor belt, and they throw a magnetic charge to it and it pulls the abrasives up to it, versus having the paper with adhesive on it and they sprinkle abrasives on top of it. So totally different way of thinking.
All right, so next we got a question from Mr. Jeff Turner. He's wondering, on a boat or a car, what are your thoughts about longboarding wet?
That is the best way to get a flawless finish, is to use a long hard block or long hardboard and run your sandpaper through the whole thing. Because here's what you're doing is, when you're trying to create that show car finish, you want that panel to be completely as flat as you can. So when they did the body work, they did the same kind of thing. They're sanding the Bondo if there's anywhere, or high film build primers, and using guide coats to try to get that as perfect as you can. And having a longer sanding tool enables that thing to stay on plane better, and then only take off the high points and leave the low points behind. So yeah, longboards are probably the best way to go. I haven't really done a lot of that work. I've never worked in a body shop. But I have sanded down a lot of cars and a lot of boats. So one of the things I try to do is, people get so focused on trying to aim for perfection, and there's nothing wrong with that. I shoot for 100% perfection, but I'm happy to get between 90 and 100. So one of the things I do, maybe you can pan over here, Craig, is I teach what I call the rule of thumb. I know it's kind of a joke, it's kind of silly, but wherever I go, I take my thumb and I put my thumb up to the edge. This is an edge. Here's a radius body line, or the body line, and I sand about a thumbnail distance away from the edge. And the reason why is because you never want to put a spinning pad, you don't want to put sanding marks down where you can't run a spinning pad. I mean, you can come back with micro tools or by hand and pull the sanding marks right next to the edge, but you're talking about something that's going to take hours and hours. And so if I have a customer that says, yeah, I want this paint to be perfect, I'm fine. It's $100 an hour. And usually they'll say, oh no, just get it good. See, people will let you work for them forever for free. So you got to be smart about this. There's a couple of people in the world like Jason Kilmer that can get the big bucks to do cars for the Riddler Award, but the rest of us, aim for really 100%, try to be happy in the 90 to 100% range. And but for that reason, don't stand next to it. Don't stand any place you can't put a spinning pad. You're going to be coming back and picking those sanding marks out by hand or with micro tools, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like you could use the Rupes Ibra Nano, or you could use the Flex Pixie with a 1-inch pad and a fiber pad on there, and just massage them out. But you're talking about something that's going to take absolute hours. And to kind of follow up on that, then people say to me, well, Mike, if you don't stand right next to the edge, won't you see orange peel there? Well, of course you will. And here's what you do. The next time you go to any kind of car show, there's custom cars with custom paint jobs, you start carefully looking at the paint job, you'll see no orange peel in easy to sand and easy to buff areas. As soon as you start getting next to edges and tight and intricate areas where it's going to be tough to machine compound, you'll see the orange peel kick back in. So not only do I not have the time or the lack of intelligence to do perfectionist detailing on some of these cars for free, everybody else has figured that out too. So, hey, work for free or, get good. That's what I say.
All right. Next up, we got a question from our very own Director of Success, Chris Ricana. Chris has a great question here for the folks at home who are dealing with OEM paint systems. He's wondering if there's any way to mediate orange peel without sanding.
Yeah, a few years ago, CarPro came out with this denim pad, and I've used it, and I think you can even find art. If you type in denim pad in Google and add Mike Phillips, probably pull up some great before and after pictures. But here's what I would tell you is, for me personally, what you're going to end up doing is you take and put this denim pad, which is thin and hard, kind of like this, on a hard backing plate, okay? And then you put that against a hard paint job. The whole everything's hard about it. It's kind of like buffing out glass with that interface pad. And does it work? It does work, but back when those things were introduced, I said this back then, and I don't think anybody ever took me up and tried to do what I said, but I said what would probably work the best with a denim pad to remove orange peel is what you would call a caveman compound. Something where you can feel the grit, something that was horrible because now you're pushing those abrasives between the denim pad and the paint and chewing things off. So much of the better compounds on the market today, when you feel them, they feel like Jergens hand lotion, like the Dr. Beasley's products. And they cut through a different technology, a more advanced technology. And for this reason, I don't think they will work as good as an old caveman compound when you're just trapping it between denim and paint. So can it be done? Yeah, it can be done. I've never met a single person that's used the denim pad to buff out an entire car. Usually it's just a little spot, they get tired, quit, and move on to something else. And if you look at the talk about denim pads, it's completely evaporated, so they're still available. Some people may use them, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but I just don't see it talked about anymore, and I never really enjoyed using that approach myself, but it can be done.
Awesome. Well, I've got a question for you, Mike, just out of my own curiosity. When it comes to factory paint, are there any, cars out there where at the factory they're, removing the orange peel before it actually, gets to the dealership, before it gets to the customer? Is that a thing at all where, maybe on like a higher end, car where they're, doing sanding at the factory?
Rolls-Royce, yeah, they have craftsmen that put more time into the finishing side of the paint systems, but for the mass-produced cars, Ford, Chrysler, Dodge, Honda, Toyota, really it's all automated, and whatever you get, you get. I've had in my life, being in this industry, I have met people that have bought a brand. I'm going to pick on Corvette, but they bought a new Corvette, maybe a black one, and when they look at it in their garage and they got the fluorescent lights reflecting, they can see the orange peel and it bugs them. So then they find a guy like me or somebody that's really good at this, Joe Fernandez out there, Superior Sign, California, and they ask him, hey, can you sand this down and buff it out? And hopefully we all educate and say we shouldn't be doing this. But I always point out their other option, Right now, while it's brand new, there's no rust, there's no crumpled fenders, take it to a body shop and have it repainted. Well, obviously, that's a really expensive option, but that would be another option to put more paint on the car. But say a brand new Corvette, any quality shop, you're going to be 10,000 probably above. And most people go, no, I'll just drive it. Of course, it's ridiculous to think about. So it's just the way of the automotive world.
Okay, we got a question here from Matt Z. Matt wants to know, how do you know when your sandpaper is no longer working or if the paint just isn't hard?
Well, when you first sand, if you're hand sanding and you start to sand, you should see in your slurry, you should start seeing a whiteness. Okay, that means you're pulling paint off. And you can also feel it as it glides over the surface as you're pressing on it. You can feel it grabbing the paint. It's a very tactical sensation. And at some point, as the abrasives wear down and wear off, it won't grab as much. It'll tend to glide more than it'll tend to grab and cut more. So it's a tactical sensation. And then just look at the volume of paint particles in your slurry. Those are the only two visual indicators I can think of. High quality sanding papers will last longer than cheap ones. I mean, the Nikon, again, to my knowledge, is still the best. It's not called a sandpaper, it's called a finishing paper. Okay, because here's the benefits of this Nikon paper is because it has 100% uniform particle placement over the entire surface and all the particles at the same size. It cuts faster and it leaves a uniform scratch pattern that buffs out easier, so it also cuts cooler. And when you do go full sanding marks, you leave more paint behind. The problem with automotive wet dry papers is you have little chunks of abrasive particles next to big chunks, and you have an uneven pattern that they're laid over the paper. You can't see it visually, but you can in a microscope. So when you sand with it, you put light scratches next to deep scratches. Well, when you go to buff it out, the light ones all buff out, but the deep ones stay behind. We call those tracers. Now, how do you get those out? So what most people do is they just push harder and compound more. Now you risk heating up the paint and taking more paint off. It's really a catch-22 vicious cycle that is so much worth it if you're going to hand sand to get a quality finishing paper, not an automotive wet dry paper. But those are the two ways I think you can tell. It just comes with experience.
Awesome. Okay. We've got a question from Umberto. He has a question that's slightly off topic from wet sanding and orange peel and dry sanding and all that, but he was looking to know what to do for artillery fungus removal from paint.
I would have to Google that, and how I would Google that is artillery fungus, add my name, Mike Phillips, because I probably got an article out there somewhere that talks about it. But besides your fingernail, clay bars, plastic razors, I've only come across it once in my life. It's a real problem. But I would, if there's any information you ever want, usually I have over 1,000 how-to articles on the old AutoGeek forum. They disappeared them, which means they're still there. But if you went to look for them on the forum, you won't see them. But if you Google them, you'll find them. So you have to go to Google, type in a few keywords for the topic you want, add my name, Mike Phillips. And it helps to add in autogeekonline.net, so that Google knows to go look at that website and you'll find them. It's kind of sad they disappeared on them. I asked them to undo that, but for whatever their own reasons, they decided that they like all the links that go to their stores, but I guess they don't want to help me. So.
We got Corgi owner back with a good question. He wants to know any suggestions for scratches that haven't cut through the clear. It happened to me on a Bentley where something was dragged across the surface.
That haven't cut all the way through the clear? Well, yeah. Go back to the basics. Use the least aggressive process to get the job done. When I teach doing test spots, I always teach using a polishing pad. So in the foam pad world, you have finishing, polishing, and cutting. So polishing is right in the middle, and use a polish and start your test spot out there. Inspect the results, and a lot of times you can gauge whether the paint is hard or soft. And that'll tell you what it's going to take to remove the defects to your satisfaction. But that's kind of been my key with using the least aggressive process to get the job done. So when I do a test spot, I don't start out with a wool pad and a compound. I start out with the orbital and a foam pad and a polish, and I use the least aggressive process to start gauging what it would take to remove defects like that haven't gone through the clear. Because again, top coat hardness is always the unknown variable. Years ago, I always would think that Audis had really hard paint. Back in the early 2000s, every Audi I worked on just had rock hard paint. but I came across some Audis that had paint as soft as butter. So I always caution people about generalizing about paint hardness and paint softness. And in my second how-to book, I actually go into detail about how to gauge paint hardness and softness. By the way, a lot of people don't know I've published 7 books. This is the first one. Let me see the published date. The published date is 1998, so probably before some of you were even born. And if you go to the index page, I always like to kind of point this out. Under Getting Started, there's 2 chapters in there. One is called How to Do a Test Spot by Hand, How to Do it. The other is called How to Do a Test Spot by Machine. So, as far as I know, that's kind of a term I always used in my own lingo and coined, and then obviously publish it. But 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's a book I wrote solely for the Flex tools. Here's a book I wrote solely for Rupes tools. I like to detail cars, but I also like to show other people how to detail cars, whether it's in person in the class or through the written word or video and article. But yeah, I've been doing it for a while.
Awesome. Well, it looks like that's about it as far as questions, Mike. So if you have anything else, we can start wrapping up.
No, the only thing I would throw out there is, if you think you're the kind of person that learns better by doing versus sitting in a chair and looking at a PowerPoint when someone talks for hours, I believe we teach the most hands-on classes on planet Earth. There are no chairs in our classes. I usually start my classes at 7:30. Sometimes I'm feeling kind of nice and starting at 8. But usually within an hour on the first day, I will have the rotor in your hand working on a jacked up car. I don't bring in cars that are nice to train people on. And I cover almost all the popular topics, more topics than anybody. This last class we just had in Wisconsin, we covered both wet wash engine detailing, dry wash engine detailing, subsurface glass polishing, topical glass polishing, machine dry sanding, rotary polishers, orbital polishers, gel coats. And anything that the cars that I bring into the class lend themselves to the teaching moment, we cover it. We just nail it. And so they're very hands-on. There's no breaks. Like a lot of classes, you got a formal break at 10. There's no breaks. If you need a break, we take a break. There is a formal lunch, but it's like 10 or 15 minutes. We bring in things you can hold in your hands. There's no plates or silverware. I always figure I'm here to teach you, do a brain dump, and teach you how to do things. I have you here for 1 day, 2 days, or 3 days, depending on the class. If you want to sit down and have a good lunch, you'll do that on your own time. While I have you, I want to teach you. So if you're the kind of person that thinks that they learn better by doing versus sitting in a chair, you should check out our classes. We have at least 10 classes coming up for 2024. We have 1 more class for this year, and it's the weekend after SEMA. Right here, I'm going to be bringing in a 23-foot Sea Hunt that's blue, but it's turned white with oxidation. I got a 65 Galaxy and an 81 Corvette, both with orange pill, real cars with custom paint jobs. We're bringing in to teach dry sanding, and I'll fill in the blanks, for doing major paint correction, one-step paint correction, AIO paint correction, engine detailing. I try to bring in things like canvas cloth top cars to teach how to correctly clean a canvas cloth, vinyl top cars or vinyl tonneaus to teach how to do vinyl cleaning and protecting, and just everything that I can think of. I try to have the right things here for you to learn on, but you can get more information at drbbeasleys.com.
Awesome. Yeah, and make sure, everybody, that you're subscribed to the Dr. Beasley's YouTube. Make sure that you've liked our page on Facebook. We're always pushing out new content on there, talking more about classes. We've got our weekly, detailing live streams with Mike, obviously. So make sure that you're subscribed so you can get that stuff to you as soon as you possibly can. Also subscribe to our emails at drbeasleys.com/subscribe. We've got all of our notifications for the live streams, as well as great blogs from Mike, great articles, and all sorts of good stuff.
And Victor, one more thing. One of the things I try to do is I try to make it really easy for people to fly here to sunny Stuart, Florida. And a lot of people that have taken my classes over the last 15 years here, they'll bring their families. I'll have wives take the class, I'll have husbands take the class, boyfriends, girlfriends, and they bring the kids go to the beach. So I have an article, and it has all of the airports, the airport code, how far they are from Stuart. I have in that same article is all the hotels, their links, their phone numbers, how far they are from the training center, and a list of my favorite restaurants and things to do in Stuart while you're here. So I've already done all the legwork for you. All you got to do is get that link from us and then do your research and make your travel plans. But yeah, that class is coming up in November. It's Friday, November 10th. Saturday, November 11th, and Sunday, November 12th. So it's the weekend after SEMA. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
A lot of hard work.
All right, Mike, anything else for the folks at home?
That's
All right, well, if you want to sign off, we can end the stream.
Sure, yeah. Hey, thanks for tuning in and watching, and Yancy should be back next week, and I'm not sure what the topic's going to be, but it'll be something fun, it'll be something cool, hopefully it'll be something educational.
Awesome, sounds good. All right, take care, everybody.